All right, let's talk about lenses. Lenses has got to be one of my most favorite subjects because I am admittedly a total gearhead and I just love talking about the gear. Glass, if you want to be one of the cool kids, that's what you call your lenses. The glass you shoot with makes a huge difference in the quality of your images. So, we're going to talk right now about the different kinds of lenses that are out there because I think it's really important, even at the very beginning, to understand what your options are in your lens arsenal, and so that you can decide what you want to put in your arsenal going forward. When you're getting started, you may have purchased a camera that came with a kit lens. Just the lens that came with the camera. We refer to that as a kit lens. And as you work through this course, you will soon find that your kit lens is going to have limitations. And the reason for that is that kit lenses are not made with the same high quality of glass, and they're not made to the same high standard that lenses that you'll buy just individually are made to. So your kit lens is awesome to get started with, but prepare yourself. You're going to probably want to make some investments in the future as your skills develop and grow and as you want to take your photography to the next level. So let's talk about a couple different kinds of lenses. Your lenses are either going to be prime or zoom. And you can read through all of these little tidbits, but we're actually going to get even deeper into them in just a minute. So I'll quickly go through them, but don't feel like you have to memorize this information. We are going to get deeper into it. Essentially, prime lenses are a fixed focal length, which means you're going to zoom with your feet. That's like one of my favorite ways to explain a prime lens. It means that you can't just twist the lens to zoom in. You're going to have to physically move to get closer to your subject to zoom in. You're going to get sharper images with prime lenses. I'll explain why in just a second when we get to zoom lenses, because it'll make more sense when you understand how a zoom lens works. Prime lenses are typically faster. They're going to be better in low light. They're a lot lighter than a zoom lens. You're likely going to need to carry more than one of them to get the job done that you're after. But they're great for street photography, portraits, documentary, weddings. They're so good for weddings, and they're just good all-purpose lenses. Now, zoom lenses have multiple focal lengths in one lens that you can achieve through zooming. For example, if you're shooting a 24 to 70 lens, you can shoot anywhere from 24 millimeters to 70 millimeters, and the zoom of the lens is going to take you from the 24 on up to 70. And I explained to you that the prime lenses are going to be lighter and faster. It's because there are fewer layers of glass in a prime lens. So a zoom lens is going to have multiple layers of glass, and they have a lot more going on inside, the mechanics with which to turn that into a zoom lens. It makes them heavier. Now, zoom lenses are great for weddings because like shooting a ceremony and stuff like that, you're going to need to be able to get closer to the subject staying right where you are. I mentioned prime lenses are great for weddings because they're going to give you very beautiful bokeh, B-O-K-E-H. Bokeh is like the blur in the background that we all are after with our pictures because it's beautiful. Zoom lenses sometimes give you that, but not the same as prime lenses necessarily. They are heavier, and they usually have a higher aperture minimum, which means that you're going to not have as fast of a speed to shoot with, and you're going to not have as good of quality in lower light. We'll get into that so much more later, you guys. I know I kind of keep saying that, but like the meat and potatoes of this course is coming. But this is all stuff that I feel like is really important for you to know before we get into the meat and potatoes, because it's gonna make all of this make more sense if you have a little bit of a precursor to it before we dive into that. So let's just give you a quick sneak peek of a couple different kinds of lenses. We've got fisheye, wide angle, a standard prime, zoom, macro, and telephoto. So what is the difference between all of these lenses, right? Well, it's the focal length and what you do with them. So the focal length is actually the length of the lens itself and the perspective that it gives you when you shoot through it. So for example, if you're shooting a 50 millimeter lens, which is a prime lens, then that's the focal length, and it has to do with the length of the lens itself. So this kind of gives you just a quick snapshot of different focal lengths, the type of lens they are, and the type of photography they're good for. But we're going to go into each of these individually right now. So the first on the list was a fisheye. Fisheye lenses are anywhere from 8 to 24 millimeters, and they give you that extra wide field of view. You're probably familiar with fisheye pictures because you've seen them in like band advertisements or cool landscape photos or, you know, very stylized pictures. This is just a picture I grabbed off of a stock photo website because I really wanted to show you what this looks like to see kind of the distortion that you get around the edges as it literally bends the photo so it all fits in frame. Fisheye lenses are usually pretty affordable. They're not expensive glass to get into. They're lightweight and really fun to experiment with, but they're very stylized. So if fisheye photography is your style, then cool, go for it. But they're not very flexible as far as what you can do with them. You shoot fisheye photos with a fisheye lens. However, these are great for interiors and real estate photography. In fact, if you've spent any time on real estate websites, you've probably noticed how rooms kind of look a little distorted. And that's because a lot of the time they're shot with a fisheye lens to show that extra wide angle of a room. So they're really fun for stylized photos. They're really fun for experimenting and playing with, and it's a nice cheap way to expand what you have to shoot in your camera bag, but they're limited. A wide angle lens is anywhere from like 24 millimeters to 35 millimeters. A wide angle lens is going to give you a nice wide field of view, and sometimes you're going to get a little distortion. So like at that 24 millimeter range, you're going to have a little bit more of the bend at the edges. More toward the 35, you'll have less. It depends on what you're shooting, what angle you're coming at, how close you are to the subject. 35 millimeter lenses, a 35 millimeter is like one of my most favorite lenses, and I shoot it often, and I'll talk more about that later. Wouldn't necessarily be recommended for portraits, but that's actually what I shoot it for. It's my style to shoot with a 35 millimeter. But with wide angle lenses, you're going to get some distortion in like people's proportions and things like that. So that's why a lot of professionals would say don't use a wide angle for portraits. For example, if somebody's got their arm out, their hand is going to look so much bigger than their face. It's going to kind of distort the proportions and that kind of thing, just because of how the wide angle kind of bends the image. So they're not the best for portraits necessarily, but that's not to say they aren't to be used for portraits. I personally love shooting a 35 for portraits. We'll talk about that more later, but they're great for landscapes. They're great for documentary. They're great for shooting street photography. Like if you're just going traveling, you're probably going to want a nice wide angle lens so you can get a great shot of what it is that you're seeing without being too zoomed in. So standard prime, these are great for portraits. So the 35 millimeter, 50 millimeter, 85 millimeter, and 135 millimeter are standard prime lenses. Personally, I own currently a 35 millimeter and a 50 millimeter, and I used to own an 85 millimeter, and the only reason I sold it is because I just wasn't reaching for it, and it felt wrong to have such a nice lens just sitting in my bag. It's an awesome lens and perfect for portraits, and I'm still kind of kicking myself for selling it, but the truth was I just wasn't using it. So these prime lenses are perfect for portraits, street photography, weddings, etc. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this lesson, prime lenses, you do zoom on your feet. You cannot zoom them in. They're the same focal length all the time. So you've got to walk closer to your subject if you want the picture to be closer to them. But these lenses are going to give you the sharpest images of all the lenses because there's very little glass for your image to have to be processed through, to go through, to pass through. And it makes them great for low light situations and faster shutter speeds. So we'll get into that, like I said, later. Sorry, keep saying that, but we'll get into it soon. But I want to point out in this particular picture, which is one that I took of a high school senior several years ago, just how beautiful and blurry the background is. That bokeh, I mentioned that earlier, B-O-K-E-H, bokeh, is so desirable in portraiture, and it means that you could really shoot anywhere with any background and make it blurry and beautiful, and no one would know what's behind them. I just absolutely love shooting with prime lenses. This is my recommendation if you want to get into portraiture, is to get into prime lenses. That's really where you'll see them shine. So for zoom lenses, you've got zooms that go from like 55 to 200 millimeter, and there might even be longer lenses. I'm not sure. You may have noticed that the higher the number, the longer the lens. So for example, you guys, I shoot with a 50 millimeter lens. I've had clients on shoots tell me my lens looks weird because it's such a little lens. It's short. It's just a little 50 millimeter lens. But if it was like a 200 millimeter lens, it would be clear out here. Okay. So the longer the lens, the higher the focal length, which would be like, 200 millimeters is longer. So a zoom lens zooms to multiple focal lengths. Pretty self-explanatory. Zoom lenses are super versatile because you pack one lens, but you've got all these focal lengths in that lens. So an example would be like your 70 to 200 millimeter lens. It's going to allow you to shoot anywhere from 70 to 200 millimeters and everywhere in between just by twisting that lens. These lenses can be much heavier than prime lenses, but they give you a lot of variety in what you can shoot. A lot of wedding photographers are going to shoot very long zoom lenses so that they have a lot of options from where they stand to get a lot of different pictures because they can zoom into them. However, a lot of photographers who shoot weddings also carry a lot of prime lenses because it's going to give them very sharp, crisp, low light, perfect images. So, they're going to have a lot more flexibility if they've got a little bit of both going on. Personally, I do not currently own a zoom lens. I did at one time own one or two zoom lenses, sold those two for the same reason I sold my 85 millimeter. I just felt like if I wasn't using them, they needed to be used by somebody, right? And in my portraiture business, I never would have reached for a zoom lens ever. And even just chasing my kids around, I wouldn't have reached for a zoom lens. You might, but my recommendation, like I mentioned earlier, is if you're going into portraiture and taking pictures of your kids and that kind of thing, you're going to be just fine with a prime lens. Now, macro, similar to fisheye lenses, macro lenses are very stylized. They're very specific to a specific kind of photography, which is very close up. So you can get macro lenses anywhere from 50 to 200 millimeter focal lengths, and they're going to give you these extreme close-up shots. Now, macro lenses are prime lenses. I don't think there's any zoom macro lenses, which means the lens is a fixed focal length, just like prime lenses that we were already talking about, and you're going to have to get really close to your subject if you want to get closer to it. They're going to give you magnification of your subject, and I think that the magnification they can go up to is like 5 times the size of the original subject. I could be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure that's the case. You're going to get awesome quality out of these macro images. If you are going into weddings, then you're going to want a macro lens to shoot ring shots and that kind of thing. But they are limited use. You can really only use them for macro photography. But they're great for ring shots, insects, nature details, textures of like, cool stuff you find in nature or fabric or that kind of thing. And then telephoto lenses are great for very far away photos. So you're going to consider a telephoto anywhere from 100 to 600 millimeters. And they're great for landscapes, nature, wildlife. If you guys have seen all the cool stuff that National Geographic puts out where you can like see right into the face of an animal, they're probably pretty far away from that animal when they shot that picture. They're probably shooting a telephoto lens. It brings the subject so close and in focus and beautiful. Now, these are crazy expensive lenses most of the time. If you're buying a high quality, anyone that's really worth purchasing is going to be very expensive, but they're for a very specific kind of photography. Like if you wanted to be shooting astronomy, holy cow, you're going to be spending a lot of money on that lens, but you're going to be able to shoot anything you want with astronomy, like this beautiful moon photo, another stock photo that I grabbed. In fact, most of the photos in this lesson, just for full disclosure, are stock photos because I do portraits. So the one where we talked about prime lenses, I shared one of my portraits, but I don't do macro photography or fisheye photography or I don't really shoot telephoto images. I'd love to. This is something that interests me, but I just haven't gotten there with my photography yet. So, if you're into landscapes and nature, or if you want to get into sports photography, holy cow, you're going to want to shoot telephoto lenses for sports photography so you can really get into the athlete's face and really get into the action. You've probably seen, if you've watched the Super Bowl, you've seen the photographers who have these huge lenses on their cameras. They have to have a huge lens so that they can get really into the action without actually getting into the action and being crushed, right? So, what lens should you have in your arsenal? Okay, remember a lesson or two ago when I told you that if you are shooting a cropped sensor, we would talk a little bit more about it in lenses. Here it is. If you're shooting a cropped sensor, for example, if you're shooting like a Nikon that is a DX model, that means it's a cropped sensor model. They literally have Nikon DX lenses that are made to shoot on your DX sensor. However, you could take a lens that's made for a full frame camera and slap it on your DX or your crop sensor camera, and it would work. But it's going to be the situation that I mentioned earlier, where a 50mm lens on a full frame is a 50mm lens, but on a crop sensor camera, it's more zoomed in. So if you're planning at any point in the future to upgrade your camera body from a crop sensor camera to a full sensor camera, I recommend that you go ahead and invest in the lenses that will be able to go with you to your full frame camera, because you cannot take a DX lens and shoot it on a full frame camera. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. So if you're planning on upgrading, go ahead and just get your full frame lenses now, the lenses that are built for full frame cameras, because you'll be able to use them with both a crop sensor camera and any camera you use in the future. So my recommendation for you is to start with a 50mm lens. 50mm lens, you could get the 50mm 1.8 lens for I think like $120. Could be wrong. I'll link it down below. It will be an affiliate link, just so you're aware, which means that I get a small commission for that, but you don't pay any extra. But a 50mm lens is a great place to start if you're going into portraiture. Now, a 50mm lens or any prime lens to get started could be a little frustrating if you don't know how to shoot manual mode, but you're here, you're learning how to shoot manual mode. Trust me, you're going to want something really high quality to be working with. And the great thing about a 50mm 1.8, or if you can swing it, a 50mm 1.4, which is an excellent lens, and that's what I shoot almost all the time, it almost never leaves my camera, is that you're going to get sharp, crisp images, and everything that you're going to learn in this course is going to come out beautifully because you've got good glass to shoot through, and the glass does matter. Now, if you're not ready to make an investment in a better lens than what you've got, or if you're already shooting with this, obviously you don't need to go buy new lenses. But if you're shooting like with the kit lens, can you still learn how to shoot manual mode? Can you still learn how to be an awesome photographer with a kit lens? Absolutely. Like, of course you can. And I'm really excited for you actually to learn with what you've got and then make the upgrades when you're ready. But you're going to have so much more fun once you get into these better lenses. They really make a huge difference. So I'm excited for you to see the difference. If you've got a buddy that has good lenses that you could borrow, ask if you can borrow their glass, try it out and see what you think. It really does. It makes a huge difference. And so that covers lenses, all the different kinds. You know what style of photography you're planning on shooting and what you're planning on really spending a lot of time on. So make your investments wisely and make sure that you've considered the camera body style that you have, whether it's a crop sensor or a full sensor, and how you want to plan your investments. So I hope that was helpful, and I'll see you guys in the next lesson.